The materials that we have for today really go into two different directions. First of all, we have a lot of very interesting stories, particularly a little bit about Elijah and a lot about Elisha. And then all of a sudden, we go to king after king after king after king, and you probably say, come on, be done with it already. Right?
Right.
So, first of all, why have a break here? Who was the king who died at the end of 1 Kings? Hmm? What do you mean you're looking at? It's not in your mind?
Was that David? Well, we had David.
Oh, no. We haven't seen Saul and David for years.
Is it Ahab?
Ahab.
Ahab, all right.
There we go,
You
Ahab.
got it right, why didn't you say it?
See, then you're never right.
Depends on you grade on
Oh,
the
I should have
curve.
looked at that.
I don't grade on the curve.
If God grades on the curve.
I know God doesn't grade on the curve either. Anyway, Ahab died, and he is replaced by his son Ahaziah. Now, if you go back to your king's list, okay, and I'm sure you all brought your king's list with you, suitable for framing.
Yeah,
How long ago did we get that?
April 30th.
Last week.
April 30th.
Last week. All right. So anyway, in Israel, up in the northern kingdom, we have Jeroboam and Nadab, Baasha and Elah, Zimri, who's just a week, Omri, Ahab, now Ahaziah and Jehoram. All right. So we are in the first major actual dynasty where you go past the son, just getting in there for a little bit of time. And we get these notes from time to time about who rebels and breaks away. The Moabites are going to rebel now, later the Edomites. So the Moabites over here to the east of the Jordan, around by the Dead Sea, the Edomites down farther in the area down here are going to rebel before too long as well. But anyway, we're told that he fell from a roof. What do you notice about most construction sites? They put up a fence. As they go up higher, they have just some sort of a wooden rail. Just so when they're walking around, you know where it is. And in one of the books of Moses, I forget which one, maybe it's even more than once, it says, make sure you put a rail around your roof so people don't fall. Well, who knows why he fell? Oh, somebody wanted him dead. He was drinking too much. He had a seizure. Who knows? Nothing said. No reason given. Okay? If no reason is given, don't make one up. Okay? We don't need to help the Bible out. But the important thing about this is when Ahaziah falls, he wants to find out, is he going to get well again? What is his mother's name? What is his mother's name?
Something like Jezreel or something like that.
Jezebel.
Jezebel.
Jezebel. Jezebel is mommy. What kind of god does Jezebel worship? Baal and Asherah. And so there are various manifestations of Baal here and there, all the different places where Baal would have been worshipped as they look for rain, including, down here in the whole Philistine coast area where they need rain because they're growing grain there too. The Philistines are the ones who actually wanted to have the Jezreel Valley up here for themselves. Remember, they're the ones that history seems to suggest brought iron technology into the region. All right, they're farmers. Remember, way back, I'm sure you remember, Samson burned down their fields at harvest time with the foxes, where he tied the two foxes per torch, put a torch between the foxes' tails, and they went and they torched all of the farmland, all of the grain. It's gently rolling hills. It's called the Shephelah, and a very productive area. So When Ahaziah gets sick, or gets hurt, he says, let's send down to Beelzebub to find out if I'm going to get well. Right? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Because
That's other than
God.
some other god.
God.
All right? Why would he do that? Because Mama worships Baals. So he's siding with Mama. I've had people who have said to me, I really would like to join the church, but my mother is Catholic and she would die if I left the Catholic Church. And so, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
It goes in Lutheran and Baptist as well. So he sticks with what Mama believes, and Elijah hears about this. That he is going to check with another god to find out if he's going to get well or not down in the Philistine territory. Beelzebub, you might know it in the New Testament as Beelzebul, which a very, very close connection, which is one of the words for Satan,
Yeah.
right? If you look in the Old Testament, very often, names of false gods in the Old Testament become names by which God, or the demons are referred to in the New. Alita, just for the fun of it, would you just make sure that's still recording? Just so that we make sure that didn't go off by some chance. Thank you. So anyway, Elijah
You're good.
says to these emissaries, you go tell the king he should check with Yahweh about if he's going to get better or not. And so the king Ahaziah says, what the guy look like? I mean, Ahab and Elijah are the ones who at Mount Carmel had that big challenge. Ahaziah heard about that at breakfast the next morning, if not before. Okay? He knew Elijah did not like his family at all. So he's, what the guy look like?
He's hairy.
Well, he's wearing a hairy cloth mantle. He's got a belt around his waist. Anybody ever tried to be like Elijah?
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist. And it's almost like, well, if that's the way he dressed, that's the way I have to dress. You know, saw it in a magazine paging through, you know, and so that's what I have to order now. So a very rough kind of clothing. So he's not hairy. He's wearing a haircloth garment, which does not sound very nice to me.
Itchy.
Huh?
Itchy.
Yeah, well, wool would be itchy for me too. I thank God I didn't have to grow up in that era. So anyway, the king says, go kill that guy. So commander of 50 and 50 men come, and well, just what do you want? Well, you know, we're going to bring you before the king. You're going to die because you're interrupting the king on his business. And pyromaniac Elijah, here comes some more lightning.
Yep.
Comes and burns, the fire comes from the heavens, burns them up. Another guy with the 50 come, boom again, burns them all up. The third guy comes and he kneels down. He says, sir, I'm just doing my job. Would you save my life and the life of my men? He says, sure. Goes with him and then lets the king know, you're going to die. You're not going to recover from this. And Yahweh, who happens to be God, is the one who's telling you that. Mom is not going to like that very much, of course. And so, one of the things to note here is he didn't have any kids who were old enough, so his brother takes over. We've not had that happen before. So with Jeroboam, he rules close to a quarter century. His son takes over for a couple of years, and the new general doesn't like him. Baasha rules for a quarter century. When his son Elah takes over, he's roaring drunk and Zimri kills him, and a week later Zimri dies. And I think I might have misspoken that the palace was burned down by Elah. It's Zimri, who had only ruled 1 week, who burns the palace down around himself. So I made that mistake. I'm sure you all caught it, and I just too polite to tell me last week. But anyway, so his brother Jehoram takes over, and he'll rule for a while. Now sometimes these are Joram, sometimes Jehoram. They're not always the same guy. So I'd like you to look at the sheet if you have it. If you don't have it, you could sneak up here maybe and get a copy in the front. But don't go in front of the camera. That's the only thing I ask is don't go in front of the camera. Otherwise, everything will blow up.
Or,
So,
Four of them, or just?
look on the list of kings. And Maria has it arranged very nicely. 849, or 873 to 849 in the kingdom of Judah. Okay, 849
Yep.
in the kingdom of Judah.
Jehoshaphat.
You see that? That's Jehoshaphat? All right. And then you go over on the other side, and you've got Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, and Jehoram. Now, look at 849 to 842.
Jehoram.
Huh?
Joram.
Jehoram.
Jehoram, yes.
In which column?
In both,
both
in both.
In both columns.
both columns.
In the north and in the south, at the same time, there is a guy named Jehoram or Joram ruling as king. North and south.
Different guys.
Different guys.
Yep.
Yeah.
Different guys. If you look at the
So there was
list,
a lot of commonality with names like.
because Jeho is the word for Yahweh,
Yes, yes.
okay?
yeah.
So Yahweh is great, is what the name means in both. Which does tell you, even in the north, even though they might be having these golden calves at their worship sites, and by the way, another reason why they might have had those golden calves would be kind of similar. I talked to you about the power of the bull last week. Another thing could be, they do have images of the gods standing on top of animals. You know, in the temple we have the cherubim, and God dwells, his footstool is there in the Holy of Holies. And so I remember a picture in one of the books that I translated where you see an animal's back and just the base of a foot of a person. So there was someone who was standing on top of that animal and sort of walking on it like you would see at the circus. And that's another way in which some people suggest that those two, the calves, were simply the footstool for Yahweh. All right, and not a false god. They become that, but the trouble is if you read enough books and enough people sat around the fire thinking, you usually get about 8 viewpoints on every single last thing. And I cannot wait to be done reading the commentaries on Samuel and Kings because of where are the cities located. For example, there's a city called Aphek. And the First Kings volume I was reading said, well, there are 5 different places that are identified as Aphek. You know, and we've got Gibeah and Geba and Gibeon, and which one is Saul at and not. And so a lot of this is just the confusion because there were a lot of places that were named the same thing. I wonder how many long lakes there are in Minnesota.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And so if you say, well, I grew up by Long Lake. Which one? You know, maybe a few of them only have one, but some of them, there are a lot of them. I know there are like 14 Long Lakes in Michigan from something that I remember from way back when. So, you know, here, Jehoram is simply Yahweh is great. But notice, in the north, the right-hand column, it's Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, Jehoram. In the south, it's Jehoram and then Ahaziah. All right? So the trouble is, if you're not paying very careful attention, you simply say, oh, nuts to it, and go on. But the reason in the northern kingdom, we have, first of all, Ahaziah, who falls off the roof. His brother, Jehoram, takes over. And that we're going to see that that's the end of the deal. Okay, Dad had died in a battle at Ramoth Gilead, which is way over on the east side here, east of the Sea of Galilee, where he was shot. Remember, that's when Jehoshaphat dressed up like a king, and he dressed up, Ahab dressed up like a common soldier, and just by chance, it says, an arrow went between the scales of the armor, and he died in his chariot. Well, so then Ahaziah, he's going to still want to get that land back, but he doesn't rule there very long. So you've got Jehoram up in the north and Jehoram down in the south. It's going to get a little more complicated. Okay? Just if you don't remember it all, so what? If you hear it once, so maybe you heard something once and maybe something will stick and you'll have a little better idea. So don't worry about all of this stuff if you can't remember it. So anyway, Jehoram, the brother of Ahaziah, in the north is the king. And remember, the north is Israel, the south is Judah. And as I've mentioned, Kings basically tells us the story of the northern kingdom. And then says, oh, by the way, here's what's going on in the south at that time. Because it's probably people who were disenfranchised, were kicked out of leading in worship, who just stayed there and evaluated according to what they knew from the writings, the words from Moses. They knew that God said it's not going to go on forever. So they keep track of what are the major events in the reign of that king. Well, chapter 2 then is going to be the end of Elijah. How did Elijah go up into heaven? A fiery chariot, is that right? Is that right? I don't believe so.
In a whirlwind.
He was taken up in a whirlwind. There was the chariots of Israel and its horsemen there, but it doesn't say he hopped on the chariot. It sounds much more like a tornado sucked him up and he never came back down. Or a hurricane. Okay? But yet every one of us, how many of you have probably seen the Sunday school leaflets with that?
Right.
You know? Oh wait, let's look carefully at what's going on here.
It does say whirlwind, you know.
I know it does.
I guess I'm gonna concur with you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I feel good. I feel better.
Yeah, thank you.
It just shows how easy it is to read what we think. And, it wouldn't matter if it was a chariot, but it just says a big wind came and sucked him up and he never came back down. And so just, to watch as we go along. Well, Elijah is going to be taken up into the heavens. Now, that's never happened before. We have one case of Melchizedek, who it says when he was 365 years old, he was not because God took him. That's way back in the first lesson that we had. But now Elijah and Melchizedek are going to have very, very interesting roles from here on out because they didn't leave normally. And many, many writings are going to refer to them. In fact, I've never been out there, but I'm told in Minnetonka, at least some years ago, there was a book called a store called Elijah's Cup, a kind of a Jewish bookstore. Elijah's Cup is the cup that is placed at Passover. A place is set for Elijah. Because the book of Malachi says, when the Lord comes to restore everything, Elijah will come first. Now Jesus says, oh, that was John the Baptist. And if you look at the stories we're going to look at today, some of them from Elijah, but more from Elisha, we're going to say Jesus fills much more of the role of being a prophet in the New Testament than a king or a priest, because of the, quote, miracles that he does, that are like the miracles that were done by Elijah and particularly Elisha. But here Elijah, well, John dresses like him. John accuses and attacks King Herod for having a wife who was married to his brother, and he took the brother's wife away. And so there are a variety of things that are going to be there. But anyway, 4 different places Elijah says, why don't you just stay here? Elisha says, no, you're going to be hauled away. I'm going with you. I know some strange things are happening. And so Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho, and the Jordan, they're kind of going down toward the Jordan. And so we have this amazing thing, amazing connections between Moses and Elijah. Remember, they are the only two who talked to God, Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, right? They both do, and they're the only ones who directly have conversation with God up on the mountain. You ever heard of something called the Transfiguration? Who's talking with Jesus up on the mountain? Moses and Elijah. Continuing the conversation about God's plan for restoration. Now I do acknowledge Elisha is also going to whack the water when he comes back. But Elijah parts the waters, Moses parted the waters, right?
And Elijah.
Moses parted the waters, or God did with Moses standing there waving his arms, at the sea. Joshua, his successor, parted the waters when they came into the land. Elijah leaves the land and parts the waters. Why didn't he swim? Part the water and go through. Elisha, his successor, parts the waters when he comes back in. I personally think that baptism in the New Testament and Jesus being baptized in the Jordan River, that it's not just the water, but it's entering into the land of promise in a new relationship with God. I think there's a geographical component as well, because when we're baptized, we come into a new relationship with God. We leave the old behind. And so in essence, it's sort of like going back out of the country and coming back in again. Just one of the many aspects of it, but that's certainly got a little bit of something there as well. So
Is Elisha related to Elijah?
no. Elisha is plowing with 12 yoke of oxen when Elijah comes, throws his mantle around him back, I think, the end of chapter 19, and then makes him his successor. But they are not relatives. In fact, we hear nothing about, as far as I know, either one of them even being married. We do hear with Eli that his sons, and Samuel with his sons. I don't believe there's anything about family members for either one of them. Which is kind of like Paul in the New Testament, who goes forth and he's not married either. So anyway, Elisha says, "Can I get a double portion of the Spirit?" What does that mean? Remember double portions anywhere? Huh?
Yeah, inheritance.
Double portion means, well, it's inheritance, but it also means you're the prime member of the next generation. Okay, so he wants to be the head of the seminary. Because Elijah's the head of the seminary. He says, I would like to be the head of the prophets, the one who is in charge of them. And Elijah says, well, if you see me taken away, then that'll be true. And then we'll find out Elisha is the one who is involved in training and teaching and all of that. Yeah.
Well, then you have to travel around, because in Elisha's journeys, as we get into this a little bit further, they were into the sons of the prophets.
Yeah,
He was the main person.
they do.
He kind of moved around, and he,
Just like there are different churches, there would be different places where they would be gathered together. For what purpose is all we don't know. We do know that things were going well enough that they had to build a new seminary down by the Jordan when the axe head flies off. So it must have been a time when it was okay versus when Ahab and Jezebel were killing all of the sons of the prophets. Yeah, there would be different places. After Elijah is taken up into the heavens, all the boys in the band say, hey, let's go look for him. Maybe he plopped down somewhere. Maybe he fell down somewhere. Have you ever heard of somebody who was all of a sudden swept away and showed up somewhere else?
Yeah, ruby slippers.
I mean in the Bible.
Oh.
That's the only thing we talk about. That's the only thing we can talk about here. It happened to Philip last Sunday in the Acts lesson. He baptizes the Ethiopian eunuch, and it says then the Spirit caught him up, and all of a sudden he was in Azotus. The ruby slippers. Is that modern? Because I don't get to talk to anything after, very early. Was there a movie about that or something?
Was Enoch one of these people also?
Yes. I misspoke myself. I said Melchizedek. I meant Enoch. I'm sorry, I misspoke myself. Melchizedek comes in as well. Enoch is the one who walked with God, and he was not. That's Methuselah's relative. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Yes, thank you. Otherwise, I'd have had to correct it next week, and I would have one more week to correct it before it would be lost.
Would have forgotten by then.
All right, so now at the end of the chapter 2, we start having troubles, things that are going on. I think there are more stories about Elisha and children than anybody else in the Bible. Not all good either. So,
Not this one.
not this one, yeah. Elijah has been taken up in the heavens. Elisha comes back with the robe, and then it says that the people bow down and talk with him and ask him whether they can go look for him. So, okay, they looked for him, didn't find him. Now, the men of the city say, this is a nice place, but the water is bad. And that's in Jericho. And so what does he do? He says, bring me a new bowl, put salt in it. They brought it to him. He went to the spring of water, threw the salt in, and said, thus says the Lord, I've made this water wholesome. So, what company did he found?
Morton?
No, it wasn't Morton.
Culligan.
Culligan. Culligan. He formed the Culligan Company. I mean, it's very clear. The Bible talks about everything that we have today. It already was done beforehand.
They don't advertise that way, though.
Hey, Elisha, man! Hey, Elisha. Anyway, okay, so he goes up from there to Bethel. Remember what's going on up in Bethel? That's where they have built this alternate worship site. I had 2 boys, I think, standing out in front of church. It's got to be almost 10 years ago now, as I was coming for confirmation one day. And one of the boys said to me, it was the strangest conversation I've ever had with a child, as far as I can tell. He said they should tear this church down and build a senior citizens place and make it useful for something.
Oh my, jeez.
Out of the clear blue.
Got your attention.
Out of the clear blue. And the voice was just kind of even strange. Now, you know, they didn't make that up. Mom and Dad have probably been talking about how churches are a waste. So this guy had a chance to dump on me what my guess would be he heard at home. All right? That's these boys. Go up, Ubaldi. Now, you know the monks who have the tonsure, that's not here. One of the things is you're not supposed to cut your hair. So what do you do if somebody's bald? Okay, then, you know, you look different if you're supposed to let your hair grow long because you're a prophet, and then you don't have any hair. And so they're mocking him, and there's another place later where we're going to see another 42, I think 42 soldiers, but here, 42 children die. Well, you know, you get trouble, if you have trouble with David and Bathsheba's son dying, what are you going to do with this one? All right? Let's be fair with this, okay? God says, I don't have to tolerate any wickedness on this planet. And those who mock me, sometimes they receive the consequence now, sometimes later. I can't tell you whether this is about the children getting the consequence or their parents. You could argue either way for it. But you see, what our job is to try to understand the God who's presented here as it's inspired and not come up with some other answer. And that's what many, many people, even who study the Bible, do today. They'll come up with some other answer. They'll have to minimize it. They'll have to say, oh, that certainly isn't the kind of God we would worship today, as if God's a different God. Right? That God's this God. The one we pray to is the same one under whom that happened. And so we have to just recognize that the scriptures are not telling God's story the way we'd like to make him up and draw him, but letting us know that we're fallen human beings and we don't play and toy with the Almighty God as if it's just a word to use. Yes, Alita?
The question I have is, in the scripture, it talks about God's relents. What is the difference between relenting, because he could have relented with these boys. What's the difference between relenting and changing his mind? Because we say that God is unchangeable.
Changing, a lot of it is, we only have human words to describe God. All right, and so the classic one for me is always, does God get angry? Well, not the way we talk about getting angry. We talk about getting angry when someone doesn't do what we ask them to do. That's usually when we get angry, or is doing something we don't want them to do. God's wrath comes when his love is rejected. Right?
Yeah.
So we will see a couple of times here where someone has sinned. Ahab, who took care of killing Jezebel, Ahab, Jezebel, who takes care of killing Naboth, so that her husband can get the land. Well, then Ahab goes into this real mourning scene, and Elijah says, okay, the consequences are still going to come on your family. They're going to be removed, but not quite yet. So that would be relenting in terms of the time. Manasseh, we're going to see next week, is the wickedest. And when Josiah says, can I stop the consequences of our whole country falling apart? And the answer is, it'll be delayed but not stopped. And so the trouble is, I can't know how to read God's mind on these things. Jumps out early in our first lesson where it says that God was sorry that he had made human beings. And yet, we know in the New Testament it says, before the foundation of the world, he knew he would have to suffer and die for us. So you get little vignettes here and there. I like to talk about the Bible as a diamond, not a pearl. If you have a diamond, it sparkles because you have many different facets. And so the Bible will tell us from this little bit of an angle, from this one, these are all part of the truth. I had a Jewish friend, Jonathan Magonet, in Great Britain. I knew him in Heidelberg. And he said, you know, the trouble with Christians is they want one answer. And it may be that there are various aspects to something that all can have a measure of truth. If you say, I have to have this one answer, and this has to be the correct thing. Now, if it's, you know, where did he cross the Jordan? There's a specific place where he crossed the Jordan. But in terms of the meaning of what are we going to do with these boys, that may go in several different directions. And sometimes it's not stated real clearly, maybe because the Lord wants us to think of it from different angles. You know, is it the children in themselves? Is it their parents who put them up to it? Are they, I think they're really rejecting God. And they're saying to God's servant, we wish you were out of here. We don't think anything of you. And that can only go so long. And then and God finally says, I can act on that. But this is God being rejected, as Elisha's being rejected. And so whether it's he relents or he changes his mind, the biggest problem is I'm stuck with human language to talk about things that go way beyond it, and I can't always get it exact. So the Bible has anthropomorphisms. You heard that word?
I have, but I can't remember what it
And,
means.
anthropos is the word for human.
Yeah.
Morphe is the word for form. So God has a face. He has a stiff, or he has a neck. He hides his face. He shuts his ears. His nose gets red in anger. Anthropopathisms are like what you're asking about. The attribution to God of human emotions. So angry, sorry, and things like that. But we only can approximate, saying, well, this gives us a little idea of what's going on. But if I'm going to nail it down so I can describe exactly God's relationship, then I'm probably going to be in trouble and make up something that's maybe off the beaten path from what's really there. So we see it, recognize that there is something there. He doesn't always stop the wrath. Aaron's two sons, Nadab and Abihu, die when they offer the unholy fire. Achan is stoned with his family. Aaron can build a golden calf, and it seems like he's the Teflon high priest, and nothing sticks. So who knows why? Why doesn't Cain get put to death by God for killing Abel? And yet all but 8 people are put to death by the flood. And so, we can look at it. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to really understand all the details of all of those. But that's part of just, reading it. And what I don't want to do is say, well, that's part of the Bible I don't like, so I'm going to ignore it.
Yeah.
That's what many biblical scholars today are doing. They want a book about morality, so anything that's immoral, they will simply say that's part of a world that we have to reject, instead of saying maybe God was involved in that to say, I'm serious about what's going on this planet, and I'm not letting everything go forever. Finally the day of judgment, he's going to draw the line, and we do not have a cyclical view of history, we have a linear view. It's not, comes round and round and round again, has a beginning, has an end. That's in his hand. It may be 834,000 AD when he comes back, or maybe 3 million AD.
Mhm.
It may be before we get home.
Yeah.
But that's in his knowledge. So I often wonder if we're not part of the early church.
Hmm.
You know, and someday they'll say, oh, back in the early church, you know, it'll be us. We think, that was a long way back. We talk about Augustine, he was 390 or 400. He was a long time after the time of Christ, and yet people talk about, well, back in the early church era. He would have been pretty frustrated about that, as would many of the others who, you know, they thought about it as a long time ago. But that's the best that I can do, is try and say it's there, at least draw it in without trying to vote on every passage, do I like this one or not?
I think just by explaining that you see it more as a diamond than as a pearl with the different facets and little pictures, that's helpful.
Mhm, mhm.
So,
I would,
Yes,
all I would say, I think it all has something to do with God's love, his unceasing, relentless love that he has for us.
If you were one of the 42 kids, mommies and daddies, would you say that? Don't
I
take
don't wanna
one.
generalize.
Yeah, and that's what I would suggest. You may generalize about God's love for us, but don't ignore God's wrath and punishment. That is the other side of the coin. It's never used to threaten people, but it is there.
No, I don't.
But see, Bruce, that's the kind of thing where somebody would say, oh, if it's all about God's love, chop that verse out. And why Marcion said, I don't buy the Old Testament because it's about a nasty God. And so that, you know, instead of saying it's the same God and
Yes.
he deals in justice and mercy, it's, well, I'm only going to pick the stories I like, which is why in Sunday school, they probably didn't have this one in there, right?
Well, where I was gonna pose would the agape, that's the all-encompassing love, right? And so,
That's a nice general statement for
Well,
us as Christians, but
right, okay,
it has to include this as well. It
yes.
has to take all of it into account and try to say, okay, let's not just
It's way
say,
above me.
well, no, no, it's not.
Well,
But if we say, well, God loves everybody, doesn't he? No. I mean, he loves everybody enough to die for them, but he is not at peace with every human on the planet with the way they're living right now. And so we have to recognize God's justice and God's judgment are there as well. And if God loved everybody and everybody's going to be saved, then why are we sitting down here trying to learn about the scriptures and learn how we can share who he really is?
well, is there anything you say, would that be justice, would that be the key word?
They're both there. You cannot have one or the other.
Without the other, yeah.
You have to have both of them. God's justice is finally dealt with on Good Friday.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean some people didn't lose the game earlier and die apart from him. Dale?
In my discipline of physics and astronomy, I've been forced to think in different dimensions, or at least appreciate that some things need to be explained that way. And one of the most fascinating books I've ever read was Flatland, where they talked about beings that existed on a line, which is called line land, and all they could do is go back and forth in a line. That was their existence, and if you met someone, you were in trouble. You had to kind of go through them to get to the other side. There was also a point land, when you were the only person in point land. Then you went to line land,
Yeah.
and it was tough to navigate, because like you say, you couldn't go easily past someone. But then there was flat land, which is, you existed on tabletop. Well, every time you went to a new dimension, you were God. Now, the person in point land would think that it was godlike to be able to go some distance, because they couldn't go anywhere. And the person who was a two-dimensional person would say, line land, that's nothing, you can only go back and forth. Well, we can go back and forth and in and out. Now, we're three-dimensional objects. That's how our mind thinks.
Yeah.
We're gods to someone who lived in point land or line land or flat land.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't possibly think like that. We could imagine how it would be to leave our land, but we'd never know how that really was. Now, there's many more dimensions than three. There's at least four, with the fourth one being time. And when you get into other realms,
Yeah.
they need 11 to explain our universe, if you talk about string theory. Now, God probably has 1 million dimensions, you know, and so to try to understand everything God's talking about and how he thinks and how he is, how silly is that? Doesn't mean we're not supposed to do it, but how silly is that?
the idea that a lot of people would have of reading the Bible is if I can figure God out, then I can figure out how I can relate to him and not get tripped up. And so instead of acknowledging he is there and living within what he has built me to be, within my essence, I still want to have my own ability to develop my own existence. And so some of you may know the term existentialism. It's been used for 150 years anyway. Soren Kierkegaard is one who would talk about that you're making your life up as you go along. It's really the worldview of most of the people who live around us. They do not want to be stuck in a worldview that already is there and you're just in that and you can't get out of it. And so an existentialist would say, you really don't need to be bound by what anybody else ever does or thinks. So don't be stuck because your mother and father did something. You don't have to be what they were. You are your own unique person. We might just throw in here this, and I didn't expect to talk about it today, but the various theories of truth. There is a correspondence theory of truth, and a coherent theory of truth, and a pragmatic theory of truth. And some people don't like all the kinds of truth. A coherent, or a correspondence theory of truth said something that we say it corresponds to a reality. So if I say Jesus Christ died and rose to save me for all eternity, I would say this story that finally has its high point in the work of our Lord as true God and true man, there is a reality that it corresponds to. And that's the essence of it, not existential where I make it up as I go. You might hear people say, well, maybe your God does that, but my God doesn't, as if there's different gods. Well, if there's only one God, then that corresponds to that, then you live within that framework, and I don't get to chop any of the parts of the Bible up. Other people just talk about a coherent theory of truth. And when I think of a coherent theory of truth, I think of a snowball. Okay? If you can put enough pressure on it and the temperature is right, you can make a snowball. You can make an ice ball and it'll cohere, it'll hold together. Or your Christmas tree. Your Christmas tree doesn't look like anybody else's Christmas tree. Even if you have one you take out of a box. Okay, you have unique ornaments and lights and everything that you put on it. And so somebody might say, I don't care what your Christmas tree looks like, this is what I like for a Christmas tree. And it holds together and that's good enough for me. A pragmatic theory of truth says, does it work? And as long as it works for you, fine. I had somebody say to me once in an adult instruction class, does it matter if something's true, if it helps people make it through the day? So if I say, any day now, somebody is going to be coming downstairs here and giving one of you a $100 million check. Does it matter if they're ever going to come, as long as you keep hoping for that day? There'll be a brighter day tomorrow. You know? Bo Peep, the lost sheep will come home. Brighter day tomorrow, they will come home. Well, we can fool ourselves with any kind of truth. I can't prove that this Bible is the Word of God to anybody. If somebody says, well, I don't believe the Bible is the Word of God, then I would politely say, well, then our conversation's really over. Not, well, let me prove it to you. Let me try and show you why you're wrong and I'm right. Because they're going to have a different model of truth. So when we're talking about what's going on here, we're saying this is the God who reveals himself in things that he has done throughout the course of time. How he's going to act is limited for us to things like, well, he says he's going to take us to be with him in all eternity. But if I say, well, I'm going to vote on whether I like it, that doesn't cohere. That's not part of my Christmas tree picture. So I had a lady once, in another congregation that I was in, I went through and told the whole story of David for Sunday school, just to prepare them. They were doing several lessons on David, and at the end of the thing she said, now you went and wrecked the whole story for me. She was very angry with me because I said what was in all the chapters about David. Now you went and wrecked it. Some people have their favorite Bible verses, their favorite Bible books. I'm not gonna look at all of it, I'm just gonna look at the ones I like. And the ones I don't like, I won't look at. Well, let's take the whole counsel of God and find out what it all says, and if we don't understand it, say, well, I'm not sure what that one means, but it's all part of it. When we get to the book of Ecclesiastes, I don't know if it's pessimistic or realistic.
Yeah.
And different days, it's different to me. Some days I think it's pessimistic, what a wasted life. The others, settle down, live life a day at a time, that's okay. So some of it depends on how I am, what I bring to it today or tomorrow or the next day as well. But we at least ought to have some sense about what do we bring into the story about the Christian faith, into the story about the Bible. There are a lot of people who don't care what the Bible says. And they say, I'm a Christian, but I don't need the Bible. I'm saying, how can you say that? Well, I know how to live the right kind of life. They're defining Christian differently. I had a lady once who said to me, I'm as good a Christian as you are. And it was in an evening college class, and she was very angry. She had gone to a seminary, I'm going to say fly-by-night seminary, toward the border with Wisconsin. And so she already thought she knew more about the Bible than I did. The fifth of the 6 nights, we came to Romans. And she walked in, and we were using the air conditioning in our lunchroom upstairs in the administration building because it was so hot. And I remember her laying her Bible open and said, if what's in the book of Romans is correct, I'm not a Christian. Slammed the thing closed and walked out. I at least got her that far. To be able to realize being Christian means somebody died for me, who's true God and true man, and my eternity is not wrapped up in what I do, but what has been done for me. All right, and so if I want it to fit, I'm a nice person, then I'm in a different dimension. Okay, and I might understand the dimension that Dale talks about for myself, but what if that's not the real one? What if somebody's in the point dimension and they're really in the flatland? And they think they're in the point dimension and they can't go anywhere. No, they could do all of this, but they don't know it. What's the Christian church told to do? Go tell the story. You're going to be brought into eternity, which is a different dimension than all the rest of them. And if that's true, that means I am not able on my own to move into a different dimension, but someone else can do it for me. And I'm going to be so angry that I am not in charge. That's what our old sinful nature is. I want to be in charge at all costs. If I want to wreck my life, let me do it. It's none of your problem. But oh, yes, it is. Because we're involved in this together. And so when we're reading this, if I say, I don't like that story, that's okay. Right? It's okay to say, I don't like that story. Or I don't understand that one, or that one doesn't make sense to me. But not to the point of, well, I'm going to throw that one out. And yet we do that. And please don't let me overstate this, but what books are in the Gideon Bibles that are handed out at Concordia? Do you know, Dale? New Testament,
New Testament.
New Testament, Psalms, and Proverbs. Why don't they put Genesis in there about the creation and fall? Now, I'm not going to get in trouble with the Gideons. We have them here, and they do wonderful work. But anytime you pick some books out, you don't use other ones. You know, by taking Proverbs, you're going at something about living for each day, which really doesn't have much about salvation in it. I would rather look at Genesis and have the story about how God chose human beings, how they rebelled, and that Jesus is the answer to that. And they haven't called me up and asked me for any advice. Okay, so, the Lord can do His work, you know, even if people don't have everything. But just realize that anytime you carry your Bible around, if you say there's some books I've never read or don't plan to read or never plan to look at again, you're saying only part of it is important to me. My aim, which is why we're going through the whole thing, is what's the whole counsel of God. Let's be uncomfortable, that's okay. Because our new nature is not. It's our old nature that is. Jesus never complained about His Father. He never said, Dad's being unfair with me. He was at peace with God. And so the aim of the scriptures is to be at peace with God. Let him be God, and don't worry about that you have to recreate whatever the world is going to be in your own image so you're happy with it. A lot of people would say, my image is let's get rid of a few of these bad apples. Let's get rid of a bunch of them. Let's get rid of a lot of them. And by the time it gets done, the last man standing, there's something about everybody. Well, let's get rid of them for that. They're this, they're that. So anyway, let's get on with a little more of the story, okay? Otherwise, well. So, Jehoram, son of Ahab, says that he removes the Baal pillar. So he does a little bit that his brother wouldn't do. Maybe his brother dying and those guys getting torched, he at least did a little something. But then we're told about the Moabites, that Mesha, king of Moab, revolts. Again, that's east of the Jordan here. The land of the Moabites is the land they went through on their way into the land of promise. Instead of coming from the south, they went around the Dead Sea and came in from the east. And then the king of Israel and the king of Judah and the king of Edom say, let's go put the Moabites back under control, under submission, because oppression and revolt has something always to do with money. Look for the money, right? When the Moabites revolt, that says we're not going to send you any tribute anymore. It's like way back when in the book of Genesis, when in chapter 14, the 4 kings against the 5, they quit sending in the toll booth money back to the bosses down in southern Iraq, and the bosses said, we're going to come and take our money and get rid of you. So a lot of this is just about things and everything. So anyway, Jehoshaphat, who's already asked back when Ahab says, let's go into battle against Ramoth Gilead up in the north, now Jehoshaphat says, you have any prophets around? And remember Micaiah ben Imlah, who said, I was in the meeting and I heard them say, let's let some of the prophets of Ahab trick him so that he dies. Because he spared the king of Syria when God had wanted him dead, so now he's being taken out by a battle against them. You make peace with somebody, and then you get on the outs with them, they're going to do God's punishment, as it were. So Elisha then prays, and it says that he asks for a minstrel. So cook up the music a little bit, and I am absolutely a lousy dancer. I am a terrible, lousy dancer. I grew up in the age where you weren't supposed to learn how to do it. It wouldn't have mattered. If they'd have let me do it, I'd still been no good. But a very, very few times in my life, I have been in a place where I was dancing, and the lights may be bright and they dim them a little bit, and you begin to forget everything around you, and you just kind of focus in on the person that you were with. That's kind of what the prophets do. There's all sorts of broadcasting going on, and they finally have everything else taken away. Anthony Kaminsky, yesterday we were talking in confirmation class, and he says he plays music. He's got his loud music on when he's doing his homework. I said, that would drive me nuts. I need quiet, so I have classical music on without words. That I can have on in the background. He said, yeah, but there's only one alternate voice hitting me instead of all the other stuff going around in the house. So I'm only hearing my music instead of the music and the television and my brother and my parents and all of that. So he's trying to push the rest of that stuff out of the way. That's what Elisha is doing here. It's the only time we are told that they got a minstrel out. And then God says through him, God is going to make water come into the riverbed on a dry day. So water comes up from under the ground. The land down here in this area east of the Jordan, I don't know exactly where and how, but Petra is down there as well, inland I believe, or to the east a little bit, but it's very red soil. Must be a lot of iron oxide in it, right? Wouldn't that be the red soil? And it's Petra. If you've ever seen that, it was in one of the Indiana Jones episodes where Kathy and I went on our honeymoon in western Colorado. You had the same thing with very red soil. So this water comes up, fills this lake or riverbed, and the water goes flowing and it all looks red, and the Moabites say, the coalition partners down there, Edom and Israel and Judah, must have gotten in a fight with each other. They've killed each other off. Here comes their blood. Let's go and pick their camp clean. So they go to pick the camp clean, and then these guys in the coalition, they're able to come and attack them. And they've come out from their city. But then the strange thing happens that the king, trying to get his God on his side, kills his son up on the city wall. And the best I can understand is the Israelites and all of them get spooked so much. God gave the victory, but they get so spooked by that, they think that's a greater power than any other kind of power. And so they say, let's get out of here. And so they break off trying to subject them once more. And that's the best I can give you on that one. I'm going to do a couple more stories before we take our break, and then take that. So here, we have the story about, first of all, the seminary widow. This lady has a couple of sons. Her husband is preparing to be one of the sons of the prophets. What that means, what their curriculum was, nobody says anything. But she says, my husband died, and his college loans are still due. And so the creditors who have been giving us money while he's doing this study, they're going to take my 2 boys in payment and make them work as slaves to pay off the loan. Very common kind of thing in the ancient world, right? And so, in fact, in our modern world too, a lot of times that's where you get child slavery in countries like India, from what I hear, where they will sell children and get some money for that. So somebody either wants a bride or wants a slave at their house, and so that kind of wickedness still goes on. But anyway, he says, well, I'll tell you what do you have in the house? Well, I've got a little bit of oil. Well, get every pot in town. The boys go to everybody's house, get every pot in town, and she keeps pouring and keeps pouring. Sounds like the flour with Elijah. Okay, little different, but sounds like the flour with Elijah. God says, I'll provide. And when they fill every single pot, he says, now go sell that, pay off the debts, and you and your children will be able to live on what's left. All right? Now we have one line up here. Very interesting story. Now we come to my favorite character, or at least one of my very favorite characters in the Old Testament, the Shunammite woman. Elisha, like Elijah, who lived up on the roof of the woman up at Zarephath, Elisha and his servant, probably Gehazi here, yeah, it is Gehazi. They're traveling around, and when they get to Shunem, which is up in the northern kingdom here as it floats away, I don't know if Shunem is on this map, but I believe it would be somewhere up in the region, I think, maybe just a little bit north of the Sea of Galilee, or north of the Jezreel Valley. But anyway, as he goes there, she puts him up. And so Elisha and Gehazi are saying, you know, we got to do something nice for that lady. She's always very gracious to us. She always has a place for us to stay. And so they cook up this scheme, and they say, well, what can we do for you? Now, how many children does she have? None. What's the dream for every woman back then? To bring children into the world. I mean, that was the kind of standard of what they would have. And so they say, well, what can we do for you? And she says, and I have how many exclamation points after this? 7. I live among my own people. You know what she said? I'm doing all right. How many people in the Bible say, I'm doing all right?
Yeah.
So I wish I had this, wish I had that. This would be nice, that wouldn't be bad. She says, I live in the midst of my own people, I'm doing okay, I'm not worried about anything. I think for an adult, that is the greatest statement of faith I have in the Bible. Because she's not waiting for anything more. She says, it's all right. Well, anyway, they mess around and they pray that she and her husband will have a son. They have a son. And then the general suggestion a lot of them come up with is that he had heat stroke or maybe a brain tumor or something like that. So when he's weaned and old enough to be with daddy, he's out in the field, And he says, "Oh, Roshi, Roshi, my head, my head." And whatever that means, they carry the boy back to Mama, and he dies in her arms. Now, this lady who didn't have a child has had one, and now is mourning because he's dead. She says, "If I'd never had one, that was okay. Now I had one, and the baby died. Now my heart is broken. Why did you go mess things up for me?" So she lays the child down, and she goes to find Elisha. And Elisha says, "Boy, that lady looks like she's kind of angry. I think God kind of kept this one from me. I don't know what she's all steamed about." So it says, first of all, to his servant, "Go put the walking stick on the child." That doesn't work. And then he goes and he's right by the child, and then the child comes back alive again and sneezes 7 times. Okay. It's a word only used once in the Bible, so it's kind of a guess of whether, but that's what they think. You know, I always wonder if he didn't yawn 7 times, but they said he sneezes 7 times. So anyway, then she gives the boy back to Mom. They'll show up a little bit later, again. But at this point, then one other little story here is about the death in the stew. Some guy goes and he gets some gourds that were bad, that were poison. And so I think he throws a little flour into the stew and then takes the poison away. And then the other one, it says that there are a bunch of people who come and loaves are multiplied. Just a few people, was it 100 people and 20 loaves?
Yeah.
If I remember the numbers correctly. And so
Yes,
the loaves are multiplied. Sounds like
Yes,
4,000, 5,000.
yep.
Here, you know, in many ways, if you were someone living in the early church and you were Jewish and you heard these stories, you would be thinking about Elijah and Elisha when you heard about Jesus. You would not be thinking about someone who's going to die for your sins. They would think Jesus must be the forerunner who's getting us ready for God's Messiah coming. And Jesus says, "No, the forerunner came already. I'm coming to do more than that." Right? And the New Testament says a lot of what you were waiting for, here's how it happened. So a lot of people will want that every little single thing, that you've got a list of 500 things in the Old Testament that were going to happen, every one of them happened exactly that way, and thus we can prove the Bible true. But they didn't all happen just exactly a certain way. A lot of them had a different turn to them. And so just because they didn't know everything, or it didn't happen the way they thought, doesn't mean that was not unfolding. You know, God says, "I'm going to restore you," and that's the deal. Chapter 5. Now we've got another story. This is my favorite little girl in the whole Bible. So, you know, you've got the bad 42 kids who got wiped out. Then you got the boy who's brought back to life. Now we have a little girl, Naaman of Syria. He's a leper. And he's conducting raids, which means 2 o'clock in the morning you're going and breaking down someone's door and stealing all of their luxury items and everything and then leaving, maybe before they even know what hit them. All right? And so Naaman, even though he has leprosy, which may just be, most all of the commentaries say that leprosy here was not Hansen's disease, which is where the flesh is actually chewed up and you have open sores and things like that, but maybe psoriasis or who knows what. But things where there were problems with it. So anyway, this little girl gets stolen in a raid and taken up to Naaman's house to serve his wife. Now, what do you do if you're, let's say, an 8 or 9-year-old girl and you got stolen away from your family and taken up to a different country? What's your view of the God who let that happen? Not good. What does she say? Oh, there's a prophet named Elisha. If my mistress's husband would go down there, he would cure him of his leprosy. She's confessing her faith after being hauled away from her family. What a deal. And, you know, I've heard people talk about this and say, well, you know, oh, she was a faithful little girl, and she would get up early every morning, and she would sweep in front of the house, and she would do the dishes, and she was just, there's none of that there. I don't care about whether she was a good little servant girl. She says, here's Yahweh, my God, and his guy, Elisha, can fix you. So Naaman goes down to the king and says, okay, I'm here, cure me of my leprosy. The king says, that's a declaration of war. Nobody's ever cured anybody of leprosy. And then, so the king rents his clothes, tears his robe, says, oh my goodness, we're being attacked. And he hears about that, so what's going on? So Naaman is told, go down by Elisha. What does Elisha say to Naaman? What does Elisha say to Naaman?
Nothing, because he
Nothing.
sent a messenger.
He doesn't even come out. He didn't come out of the house. Which in the New Testament there's a story about a fella who comes and wants Jesus to heal his servant. In two of the Gospels, there's a confrontation with Jesus, a discussion. The third one, it's just his messengers come. The leader says, messengers go and ask Jesus if you'd heal my servant. And Jesus and the messenger don't even, and the leader don't even talk. Says, I know what it's like to have people under authority. You can say the word and it'll be done. Well, Naaman, he's kind of irritated. By the way, that Sunday school story, when that one comes around, at least in the old Sunday school materials from CPH, they wouldn't tell you it was in all three Gospels. Because they didn't want you having to scratch your head. What about two of them say he had the conversation? The third one, that they sent messengers back and forth. So they don't even put the Luke one in there. I don't know why, but let's look at all of what's there and then try and make sense of it. I'm told that that's too much to ask. So anyway, Elisha says, all right, tell him to go down the Jordan and wash 7 times. That little piddle. I've seen the Jordan in the summer. I haven't seen it in, I guess I've seen it in the spring, but not clear enough to see how it was flooding. But in the summer, it's about as wide as from this partition to this one. 10, 15 feet wide in places when it's dry season. And he says, we got some great rivers, the Abana and the Farpai River up there. They're good rivers. Why go down a little piddly thing here? And he goes storming off. The boys in the band say, hey, if he'd have told you to do something, well, I want him to come and wave his hand around here and do hocus pocus, Jimmy Ocus and all that. Just go do what you were asked to do. And he comes out of the water and he's cleansed. Woo! He says, I guess that's the only God I'm going to worship. That's the only God there is. So he takes a couple of donkey loads of dirt so he can kneel down on Israelite dirt when he prays. And he says, then there's a conversation. He says, now, is it okay if, I do some public functions as well. And so when I go into the temple with my king, he's resting on my arm. Is it okay if I go in there? And Elisha says, go in peace. Which our church ought to learn to understand once in a while when we have some public and civic events where people have to participate and not make so much trouble. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Well, anyway, so Elisha refuses any kind of a reward for this, and then Gehazi says, I think I could enjoy some of that money. So he goes and he lies, and then when he comes back, Elisha says, I know where you were, and he gets the leprosy. See, the leprosy is kind of hovering around there. God says, he can come popping on you anytime. I'm protecting you from a lot of things. He can come popping down anytime. And so Gehazi, at least at that time, gets the leprosy then. Okay, let's take a break. Wait a second. Can't do that yet. Then he leaves as a leper. Now you can stop.
Really?
Let's get going. Quiet. And the question is about, what about the writers who have written all this down? As you're reading the stories, there will be a little hint. It might be the summary. This king did what was against God, or this king did what was right in God's eyes. Or it might say God was keeping his promise to David to continue to have a lamp bright and shining for him. So there will be things that they are telling you. But the main point of the story, and I mentioned it was a couple weeks ago, that these are probably people who had been in leadership positions and were removed from their office by Jeroboam. And so they stay there, but they keep a record of all of the things that were done, and the things that are particularly offensive to show that the leaders are turning away from God. That's what we have here. So then it'll say all the other stuff, what they did, and the wars they fought and all that, that's in a different book. But nobody can write down everything. I had a student once who broke into tears, and right in class, so what are you crying about? She says, I can't keep up with you. I'm trying to write everything down you say, and I can't keep up.
Yeah.
I said, I often say things in different ways. Nobody is going to write down everything that I said. You're to learn how to pick the highlights out, and I'll try and be careful enough to say what the major things are, and look at those from different angles. But, I mean, it's like I would see people madly trying to copy this down. And I said, you know that's on the website. You have all of that available before you ever come into class. That's also for when you're reading, and for you folks as well. That's available to you if you want to use it before you show up here. That you can use that to help see, okay, what are the main points? And so here are the main scenes that we have. But they have a purpose. And some people will look at different purposes, and they'll say, well, there's this accent here and there's this here. And some of it we just have to say we aren't going to always get it exact. But the way in which they write it down, it might have been just notes jotted down. There he goes again. So if somebody would want to evaluate a particular presidency, they would have their own idea, is this going to be a good president or a bad one? And so they might write down, like our various TV channels, which are going to, the cable channels are going to either like something or not like something. And you say, how can this be going on and these two different groups have such a different idea of what's happening, let's say in Baltimore? How can they be describing the same thing so differently? Well, this says, here's God's side of the story about why Samaria and the northern kingdom fell, and then why the southern kingdom fell. And so it's got, and over time there will be these little hints about these people rebelled or these people rebelled, and that's because God willed that the kingdom would not be able to control everything that they controlled before. And for us it's just a half a line, but people since about the 1850s have been examining tablets in Iraq, major tablets written in a language called Akkadian, a cuneiform language where you make impressions on clay. And so they have looked at a lot of other history stuff that's been written, and they'll try to say, okay, how do these things coordinate? So a lot of the people who are here are mentioned elsewhere. Jehu, who we're going to get to in just a minute, he is shown bowing down to Shalmaneser III on a big basalt, a big black kind of a stone that stands maybe yay high. And I've been from here to here looking at him in the British Museum, where he's bowing down before the Assyrian king, right? And it's referred to in the Bible too. Not everything matches exactly. And so that's part of the problem. But everyone makes their choice of what they want to say and why they want to say it. And that's it's easier with the prophets because you have them speaking directly through God to the people. Here, you're reading a story and you have to kind of catch along the way. What's the drift? What's going on? And so next week, except for Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah that we're going to get to in the third year, we're getting just about to the end of the narrative. And then we're going to get to discussion at certain points between God's people, God's leaders, and the people. And that's going to be a whole different kind of thing. So what you might be used to here, come fall, we're going to be reading every line. And I'm going to try and go through a lot of books, just line by line, and say, here's what's going on here, here's the framework here, here's what's going on at this point, and try and give more background and detail to it. Okay, right now if I tried to do that, all I would do is read you the story, and that would be all we'd have time for. So anyway, so they're building a new seminary. The guy borrows an axe. Axe head flies off the handle. And what does Elisha do? Throws a stick in the water and the axe head floats. Okay?
Okay.
Why do you laugh?
It's marvelous, it's marvelous.
Marvelous. Can you think of somebody looking at this and saying, oh, Jesus was on top of water too?
Walked out.
Oh,
Walked on water.
sure.
Okay? You know, if you're looking at strange things that happen, this is, you know, where you can pull that one in. Then Elisha keeps telling the king of Israel when they're going to be raids. Sometimes part of the problem in here is we don't have the names of all the kings. So people are, well, which king is being talked about here? And we don't always have those. But anyway, he knows when the Arameans are going to raid. Arameans are the Syrians. So remember, like the little girl. And by the way, it bothers me greatly, more than anything else about the story. I wonder why they didn't tell me whether Naaman went back home and let that little girl go back to her mother and father.
Right.
Inquiring minds want to know, and I want to know. Did he let her go back? Should have. We don't hear that part of the story. See, if I were writing it, put that part in.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not writing it. So anyway, the king in Syria says, who's ratting me out? Every time we go somewhere, they're waiting for us. And they say, oh, there's nobody here. That Elisha, he has a sixth sense. He knows where you're going before you know where you're going. And he tells the king. So then they quit raiding. Then they say, well, wait a minute. We could keep on raiding if we got rid of Elisha. So they go to a city called Dotan, and they walk up to Elisha and say, we're looking for Elisha. He says, I'll take you to him. And then all these guys get struck with blindness. And I don't remember exactly how far it would be down to Samaria, but it's a walk. And Elisha's servant Gehazi says, oh my, all those big important guys and us, we're all going to get wiped out. And he says, look about you. And he sees the heavenly armies there. That we're not alone. God's got plenty of others around here with us. And so every once in a while, it doesn't mean drive like a madman, because your guardian angel is going to watch over you. Okay? But there are things going on that are above and beyond our ken that the Lord takes care of. So anyway, the site is returned when they get there. Some of the people say, well, let's kill them off now. No, there are guests, give them a nice dinner, send them home, and they aren't going to be giving me trouble anymore. Then the Syrians, I mean, they're not going to quit. They keep coming back. So then they surround the city and they besiege it. And siege warfare simply means we keep everybody in until they starve to death. Nobody loses their life in battle on the outside. We're going to keep them from that. That's why inside a city, if you can have a place to go down and get water, dig down into the ground and get water, underground well or whatever, and that they stored their grain in cities, so that if somebody came to attack them, they've at least got food and water, bread and water. And so sooner or later that runs out. So they do the siege, and then this king is walking around with sackcloth underneath his robes, and this woman says, we ate my baby yesterday, now she hid her baby, and I'm hungry. Make her give me her baby so we can have supper tonight. And all the king can, and all you have to do is go back to Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 27 and 28. Because it says in there, if you turn away from God, these are the things that are going to be happening. And in Josephus' day, the Jew who becomes an army general for the Romans, and he writes the wars, about all the wars. His description of what happened in Jerusalem when they did siege warfare is just horrendous. It's awful of what people did to each other, and so we know that goes on. Well, anyway, what does the king say? I got to get that Elisha guy. He's the troublemaker. So you're the troubler. You're the one who makes the problem for me. And so Elisha says the city is going to be delivered by tomorrow. Bread and everything is going to be selling at normal costs. And the captain who's standing there says, even if the Lord opened the heavens and threw rain down, you're not going to have that tomorrow. Well, there's some lepers who are starving. They're outside the city, and they go to they say, let's go get some food from them. Either they'll kill us or they'll give us a little bit of food. So they go and they find the camp is empty. And there's baggage and everything and weaponry all the way down to Jordan. And what have they done? God put a scary spirit in them. They all ran away. All ran away. And so then the next day, everybody's going out into the camp to get the food, and the captain gets stomped to death in the process. So he gets to see it, but he doesn't get to eat any of that. So this is what we call holy war, or God's war. He can win victories with means that we don't anticipate or expect. Then here's the Shunammite woman back again in chapter 8. After she's been gone for 7 years down in the land of the Philistines, she comes back and says, can I get my land back? And Gehazi, I don't know if his leprosy went away or how this is going, but Gehazi is talking to the king about this Shunammite woman and her child coming back to life again. And he's, there's the lady I was talking about. This is the woman. This is her son. And the king says, give her land back and give her everything that she would have earned if she'd have stayed home. So kind of a nice thing he does for us.
So there are good things that happen.
Oh yeah, every once in a while. Now, when Elijah was up on Mount Horeb, God said, I want you to anoint Elisha to succeed you. I want you to anoint Jehu to be king in the northern kingdom. And I want you to anoint Hazael to be king in Syria. The next chapter after that, or 2 chapters after that, is when Ahab went in battle against Ben-Hadad of Syria and then spared him. God says, see, I wanted the Syrian king gone. Syria is not Assyria, okay? Syria is up on the northeastern part of our map up here. Okay, this is Syria here. Assyria is over here, that's Iraq. Northern Iraq is Assyria, southern Iraq is Babylon. All right? Why the names are connected, there's a history to it, and don't worry about it. So anyway, Hazael is to replace Ben-Hadad. Jehu is to replace Ahab's family. So Ahab didn't get rid of the king. God says, okay, I'm going to get rid of his household. And I'm going to get rid of that other king who was attacking, and I gave victory and they didn't take it. Remember, Saul dies, so does Agag. Way down with the Amalekites, same kind of thing. When I give you a victory, would you please take it? Don't be pushing it off somewhere. So, anyway, Elisha himself goes up to Damascus, and he anoints Hazael. Says, you're going to become the king. Hazael, the next day, it says he took a wet cloth and put it on the king's face. My guess is he suffocated. Some people say, well, it could have been he just put a compress on his head, or a cold cloth or something, right at the time when he was dying. I think he killed him and took over. But he said, oh, I went in to see the king, and he wasn't breathing anymore. And forensic medicine wasn't what it is today, so they couldn't figure that out. So then he becomes the next king, and he's going to do a lot of bad stuff. The Arameans, back in the time of David, the Philistines from the southwestern part of the country are the ones always making trouble. Now it's the Syrians. Both of them, the Philistines really wanted farmland. The Syrians want the trade route all the way down to Egypt. So between Tigris Euphrates and the Nile, they want to control the trade route, the shipping and the transport and everything, and the selling of goods, because you can raise the price very high if it's a special good, and so that's what they want. So anyway, here's where it gets really complicated. Remember, we have Jehoram down in the south, right? All right. Jehoshaphat has gone into battle twice with Ahab, or his kids. He's made a treaty with them. If you can't beat them, join them. And so Jehoshaphat has married his son, Jehoram, and look at your little chart here now, okay? Married his son, Jehoram, to a lady named Athaliah. Athaliah is a sister to, go to the right column, both Ahaziah and Jehoram. So Jezebel is the queen mother up in the north. She had a son, Ahaziah, who fell off a roof and died. His brother replaced him, Jehoram of Israel. Their sister, Athaliah, was married to Jehoram of Judah. And she brings Baal worship down to Jerusalem with her. Right? That's how complicated it gets. That's why I have the J's and everything in there, all right? So, you've got the Edomites revolting now. They decided not to play favorites anymore. But then Jehoram, we're told in Chronicles, I haven't mentioned Chronicles, and we're not going to see that for a whole year. Well, 2 years. 2 years from now, we'll probably be seeing Chronicles. But anyway, it says in the book of Chronicles that there was a raid from somebody, I think it might have been the Edomites, and all of the brothers of Jehoram were either taken into captivity or killed. So Jehoram is the only descendant of David who's alive. Daddy, Jehoshaphat, died. Jehoram is there. He's got some kids. All his brothers got killed. So you've got Jehoram and his kids. When Jehoram dies, his son Ahaziah takes over. All right? Everybody else is going to get killed as well. Okay? Ahaziah's relatives get killed too. Ahaziah is down in Judah, son of Jehoram, who's married to Athaliah. So Jehoram, or I'm sorry, make sure I say this right. Ahaziah in Judah is the grandson of Jezebel up in the north. Okay? So, Uncle Jehoram was still trying to get the land back over here. His dad, Ahab, got shot with an arrow and was killed. His brother fell off a roof. Now he's still trying to get the land of Ramoth Gilead back, and all of where the Golan Heights would be, and all of that are in that general vicinity. He goes into battle and he gets hurt against Hazael, who's been anointed king up in Syria. So he's home in the Jezreel Valley, up in that area where we've talked about so much here. He's the southeastern part here is where the city of Jezreel is. He's home recovering from his wounds. And mommy, Athaliah, whose brother is Jehoram of Israel, says, why don't you go see how your uncle Jehoram is doing? See how he's recovering from his war wounds. So Ahaziah of Judah goes up to see Uncle Jehoram, going to see Grandma up there as well. He's taken over for his father. And right at this point then, Elisha sends his servant to fill out the three things. Elisha will be your follower, Elijah. Jehu is to be king in the north, and Hazael up in Syria. Hazael has killed his king Ben-Hadad, names his kid Ben-Hadad just to kind of cover it as well. So, you know, I'm going to act like real smart there. And so then, Elisha now sends his servant. He says, Jehoram is still recovering over here, but up here in the north, they're still trying to get the land back from the Syrians. Go and find General Jehu and anoint him to be king. So this young fella goes with a horn of oil, says to Jehu, can I talk to you for a minute? Yeah, let's step outside where it's quiet. Pours the oil over him and says, you're the new king of Israel. And then he runs away. Quick as a wink. He's the guy who's called the Meshuggah. A goofy oddball. Because that's what they thought of prophets. That's what you think of any religious leader. Meshuggah. Okay. So, now he runs away. When the other generals, they say, what'd that guy want? Oh, he's nothing. What did he say? He said, I'm the new king. Hell, bow down. Yes, sir. And then he hops in his chariot and he drives like mad. With my students, I would always ask them, can you think of the name of the student in your class who you all knew when he was leaving the parking lot after school? And they could all come up with at least one, if not more, peeling out of, oh my goodness, there goes Fred. No offense. So anyway, Jehu comes running or driving very fast back home. And the king, Jehoram, thinks he's given a report on how it's going to battle. And so he says, well, what's going on here? Well, first of all, you have Joram, or Jehoram, from Israel, recovering from his wounds. Ahaziah of Judah, visiting with Uncle Jehoram to see how he's doing. Jehu says to the people who come to ask what's going on, said, what's it to you, falling behind me? And so they go, oh, that guy's driving like crazy. So Jehoram, who's recovering from his war wounds, gets killed at Naboth's vineyard, which is the 1 Kings 21 story. You, Ahab, are going to die on this property. Well, it's not him, but it's his kids. One of you ladies was asking me last week, I forget which one, about do prophecies ever not come true? They come true sometimes differently, like this. They come true, but not exactly. Elijah should have anointed Jehu and Hazael. He just has someone else do it, but it happens. Okay, so anyway, Joram dies. Jezebel gets thrown out of the window. She painted her eyes real nice with everything to doll herself up, thinking maybe she could, find a way out of this, and she did, right out the window. The trouble is that Ahaziah of Judah, who's been up here seeing Uncle Joram, they say, well, let's kill him too. Why? Because his mommy's got Baal worship going on in Jerusalem as well. Let's wipe out everybody who's approving of any Baal worship. So up in the north, they're saying, well, they're worshiping the Baal down in Jerusalem too. So let's get rid of all of them. He flees, and Megiddo is toward the western, and that's where Har Megiddo, Mount Megiddo is Armageddon. Okay, Har Megiddo. And so Jezebel dies. That's pretty much the end of these real nice little stories. And we're moving now into a little bit more of the complicated stuff, and we're going to just walk through this now. We're going to walk through this rather quickly. So, Jehu says, okay, what are we going to do with the family? Let's wipe them all out. When we get to the book of Hosea, Hosea is going to be very, very negative about what Jehu did. He says, you should kill the king, but not everybody else. Well, the best way not to have somebody come back and try and kill you, kill them all off. And so Ahab's 70 sons are killed, all their heads get thrown in the basket and get dumped out by the city the next day. Jehu says, oh, I didn't tell you to do that. Thank you. So, wink and a nod and acts like he's innocent. The family of Ahaziah down in Jerusalem all gets killed. All of them, every last one of them, right? Except one. Everybody but one. Ahaziah's sister grabs a little baby Joash, who's 1 year old, and spirits him away along with his nurse, and they keep him in a safe spot so Grandma doesn't know that he's still alive. Right? Grandma Athaliah now becomes the queen in Jerusalem. She says, I'll make this place, maybe they killed my brother up there, but I'm going to make this place what it should be up there. They killed my mom, but I'm going to make this the place for worshiping Baal. And so she has a Baal temple somewhere there. The only priest that we know, named Matan, the only Baal priest we know from here in Jerusalem. And so Jehonadab of Rechab helps Jehu to kill everybody that they can then of the Baal worshippers. So Jehu acts pretty nice. I'm going to get rid of all the Baal worship. And at this point, Hazael wins. So they don't go back and try to reclaim that land up over there that they were fighting against Hazael for. At this point, they just say, forget it. And so the land east of Jordan stays under the Aramean control, the Syrian control. Well, Ahaziah's mother now seizes control in the south. Baby Joash gets spirited away with the nurse, and at age 7, the high priest Jehoiada says, okay, it's time now to kill Athaliah. See, sometimes we're not unhappy when somebody gets killed. The 42 kids, that's kind of a problem. But with her, we say she had it coming to her. And so at age 7, they bring Jehoash out, or Joash as he's called here, and Athaliah tries to stay in the temple. They get her out, I think, by the horse gate. which is later called the New Gate, going on down toward into the Kidron Valley, and they put her to death there and get rid of her. And then Matan, the priest of Baal, and all of the others who were worshiping the Baals are all put to death as well. So they cleanse the land at that point, and everybody rejoices that they have a king. When we get to this Joash, he is the only descendant of David, male descendant left. His father, Ahaziah, gets killed up in Megiddo. And I think I said Jehoram's relatives, it's Ahaziah's relatives, his uncles who would have been Joash's uncles who had been killed. And so there is almost nobody. This is the thinnest thread. You want to know how the story is told and what they're really saying? God made a promise to David, and he just kept it. But in all of the muddle of all these names, you might have missed that. You might have said, no, he's the only one left. And from there on, and he's going to get killed later for giving away a bunch of the loot. But then he has a child that becomes king. He's going to get killed. Then others along the way. But this is the narrowest little thread. This is the hourglass at its narrowest point. Okay, and so part of it is, wow, look what happened here. Chapter 12 then. Now in Judah, Joash, or Jehoash as he's also called, and sometimes they're called one because of the northern kingdom, I believe, is the one that uses J-O, and the southern kingdom J-E-H-O. So they would just have the same name, or a very similar pronunciation, depending on north or south. But anyway, here what we learn in Kings is that Joash reigns for 40 years, and when Jehoiada is high priest, he does everything that's right, except he leaves those high places. The priests are supposed to take money that was offered to them for various sacrifices to redo some of the stuff in the temple. They don't get around to it. So then the king says, okay, put a box there. And it might be the Levites who carry the money over the box. But he says, put a box in there, and this is not money for your sacrifice. This is not your regular Sunday offering. We need an extra offering. And so put in extra money for repair of the building, for putting in the air conditioning, and those kinds of things. So don't take the money you were going to put in there and just put it over here. This is an over and above additional thing. And it says the workers dealt honestly. That may be the biggest surprise in the whole Bible. But then we're told that Hazael took Gath. Where's Gath? Well, there's an easy answer to it. Nobody really knows. But everybody knows kind of where it is. Gath is one of the Philistine cities over here. So Hazael from up here is now controlling the entire trade route down to Egypt. Which means he can come and push now into Jerusalem and make trouble up in Jerusalem as well. And so Joash is so worried about that, he takes everything that was in the temple from his dad Ahaziah's special gifts, Grandpa Jehoram's special gifts, great-grandpa Jehoshaphat's special gifts, and he takes all of that money and he gives it to Hazael and says, would you please not attack us? He bribes him off. The people didn't like that. So they killed Joash. Right in the middle, which is right between the city of David and where the temple was. They kill him.
Why not?
Hmm?
Why not?
Why not? Well, we don't have many of the kings of Judah killed. We have more in the north. We don't have that many in the south who are killed. But when they do that, then that doesn't mean that they change dynasties. So we just have to wait for that one. Who's going to be king after Joash? Well, Amaziah. We'll get back to him in a minute. Now, we go back to what's going on in the north. So Jehu and Jehu and Omri each get only about 8 verses. They're the major kings, but they don't get many verses. And so Jehu, he ruled for a little while, took over, and then his son Jehoahaz takes over. He's the only kind of close to nice, kind of righteous guy in the whole bunch of them. but Hazael and his son Ben-Hadad are winning a lot of victories. This is going to be 5 generations we're going to get with Jehu. We had 4, or maybe 3, I guess you could call it, with Omri. But Jehoahaz, as he's getting attacked, pleads that there will be someone who will be sent. And then we have some things about this sacred pole, the sacred pillar, an Asherah pole in Samaria, which may be a designation or a representation of a tree. In the archaeology book that I translated, 500-page book on all sorts of stamp seals. One of the big early things that you see is a tree. Because the tree was seen, an apple tree with all the apples it produces, and so the tree is symbolic of God who produces good things for people. And often they'll have animals to the side, then goats and things like that are around the side. Later they have not just the tree, but a depiction of a deity somehow. So anyway, after Jehoahaz, and he's none of them sound good in the north, but he's probably the only one who says, God, would you help us out a bit? Then his son takes over. So now we have Jehoash, or Joash, so look at your list here. All right? Yeah, go on the right-hand side, and you see Jehu, 842 to 815. Then Jehoahaz, I just talked about him. Then Jehoash. He's not far off. If you look at Joash in the south, he's 837 to 800. In the north, he's 801 to 786. So not only did we have a Jehoram in the north and south at the same time, we also had a Joash for a little while in the north and south at the same time. All right, I'm sorry. It's not my fault. I didn't write it. But anyway, it says he is very evil. And Joash in Judah got killed. He's replaced by his son Amaziah. And Amaziah has won some victories in battle down by the Edomites. And he says, I'm going to go take the northern kingdom back as well. And so Amaziah starts threatening Joash up in the north. And Joash says, look, little kid, you won a little victory over a little wimpy group. Don't be coming and trying to win some big victory over me. Play in your own ballpark. Amaziah does not listen to that. And so the result of it is about 200 meters, about 600 feet of the northern wall of Jerusalem gets knocked down. And Chronicles will fill us in on a lot more of that. We'll talk about it then. I'm sure you'll remember all of this anyway. So Amaziah, because he lost the battle and got a bunch of the city destroyed, he flees to the city of Lachish. And they catch up with him there, and they put him to death. So Joash, who had been saved as a little baby, gets put to death. His son, and you get put to death when you lose a battle. We just vote him out of office, maybe. Or say we have term limits. For them, it was, well, got to get rid of this one. Maybe the next one will be better. But if you hand away the land, or you hand away the city wall, they go, wait a minute. We don't like that one. We don't like that happening. And so Jerusalem, for the first time in all of our stories, is actually attacked and defeated. Then, that's about all we hear of Joash of Israel fighting Amaziah of Judah, and then Jeroboam the second. And he's only the second. He's not because he's the son of Jeroboam the first. Jeroboam the first was the first king we had in the northern kingdom. He just happens to have the same name. We call him the second because that's how you distinguish them. So he takes over, and he's going to rule for a good long time. Now here's the deal. If you look at our little sheet, you will see that Amaziah in the southern kingdom rules from 800 to 783. Then his son, remember he just got killed in Lachish. His son, Uzziah, who is known in the king's text more as Azariah, and Uzziah up in the Isaiah material, he rules from 783 to 742. Jehoash's kid Jeroboam II rules from 786 to 746. They each rule for about 40 years. And this is the same time that there had been battles. I didn't mention it in much detail, but there was a battle at Karkar, which is up in Syria in 853, where the coalition of the northern kings helped the Syrians, and the people in Assyria, northern Iraq, there were a lot of people fighting each other for power. And so they weakened each other. So there is no threat to either Israel or Judah. Jeroboam II establishes the land all the way up to the north that was once held by Solomon. Uzziah or Azariah in the south establishes all the land down to the river of Egypt. So between the two of these guys, even though they're not allied necessarily with each other, all the land that David and Solomon had that was promised to Abraham is back there, and they got about a 40-year period of peace. They thought, oh, God's kind of restoring everything to us. In fact, Jonah gets mentioned here, and it says that Jonah said, go take that land back. He's a very nationalistic prophet. Go get that land. God wants you to go get that land. And so at this point, just before Jehoash up in Israel, before he dies, and his son Jeroboam takes over, we get a little inserted story about Elisha. And Elisha had said to him, hit the ground with your arrows. He hits it 3 times, and so he only had 3 victories, and then the Syrians beat him up good and proper with Hazael. But Elisha then dies. And not long after he dies, the Moabites are raiding. Okay? Everybody is always trying to pick clean whatever they can when they have the time to do it. Today we'd call them gangs. Literally call them gangs. That's what they are. So they bury Elisha, and then during a raid, they're burying a guy, and the closest grave is Elisha's grave. They shove the guy in that grave because you're going to run away. So they throw the guy's body in the grave and head for the hills, and when the guy's body touches Elisha's body, the guy comes alive. So we've got strange stories. Enoch, who walked with God, Elijah, who gets hauled up in the heavens in a whirlwind, the little boy Zarephath, who's raised by Elijah, the boy here with the Shunammite woman by Elisha, and now Elisha's bones are so holy that when the guy comes against them, he comes alive again. Do you know the story in the book of Matthew? It's in chapter 27. It says, when Jesus died, many of the saints came back alive, and after the resurrection, they came into the city and were seen by many. And poof, that's where it ends. Only in Matthew, and it's based on this. It's the same kind of thing. You die, or you're near someone holy, you get holy, you get brought back to life. That's why when our Lord comes back, we're all going to come back alive. Because we're going to be in His holiest. Then we come back alive again. Okay? We'll push that another time. All right? But I bet you didn't know that story, Sylvia. Remember that one, Dale? When I ask people about how many resurrections are there in the Bible, I wheel through all these and I say, well, there's really only one. Because resurrection is not just coming back to life, it means to come alive, never to die again.
Eternal life.
Jesus is the only resurrected one. The rest of them, they come back alive and then they die again. You see some of those in like Lazarus and the widow, or the daughter of...
Such the J.
Yeah.
Do we
I'm in
think
the wrong
that
Bible.
those, in the New Testament story, that those walking around people from the grave stayed walking around, stayed alive for?
I have told you everything the Bible says about it.
Jairus.
Okay,
Jairus.
because in this case, I'm thinking that when they say the boy came, is it a boy, comes alive, the dead man's body came alive, I'm thinking, okay, he came alive, he's gonna stay alive.
No, he just got a little extension.
We don't know. But I mean.
Otherwise, he'd be around. Otherwise, we'd be talking to him. Every one of those people, Lazarus, the young man named
No, I
Jairus.
don't mean, no, I mean,
It says they were seen by many.
like healed, like we go to the doctor and we get better and we have a kind of a more normal life is what I'm saying.
Not a single word more is said. It's just what happened in Elisha's time happens in Jesus' time too. To let us know the uniqueness of the holiness of Jesus.
Just that moment. Just that moment.
So, it says God remembers the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the promises. They have those 3 victories. And then we go back to this story. So down in 2 Kings 14, now Amaziah is ruling. It says he didn't rule the high places. The servants who killed his father, Joash, get killed when he establishes his kingdom. And then this is that war I was telling you about with Jehoash, where you get 600 feet of the wall knocked down, and then the king takes a whole bunch of the treasures from Jerusalem. So I've given you that one already. Amaziah lives for some more years, but then he flees to Lachish. They didn't like the fact he got beat up, and so Azariah, the son of Amaziah, is made king after Amaziah got killed in Lachish. And then it says he built Eilat, the port, way down here, right there. Eilat and Ezion-Geber are both little ports that go on into the Gulf of Aqaba and then down into the Red Sea and do trade and all of that. That keeps going on and off. But anyway, so Azariah, also known as Uzziah, and Jeroboam are each ruling for about 40 years then. I told you about Jonah being restored. I jumped ahead of the story a little bit. And Uzziah actually ruled for 52 years. But he got leprosy. Okay? And so his son becomes the co-regent. And so sometimes they will give him only the number of years that he ruled independently. And that's the number that you have here, so the number doesn't add up to 52, because they say when Jotham became co-regent. In fact, a lot of people think, so you see where it says Uzziah and Jotham as co-regent, 750 and following down to 742, and then Jotham takes over. The numbers are difficult. Let's just acknowledge the numbers are difficult, not worry about it anymore at the moment. But Uzziah, the son of the guy who got killed at Lachish, he got leprosy. So then his son is co-regent Jotham, and many of the scholars say grandson Ahaz. Also, that dad, the Jotham died while Uzziah was still alive, and so Jotham never really had an independent rule by himself. There are books like The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings, all sorts of different ways to figure things out. And so anyway, then in the northern kingdom, we talked about Jeroboam, who established all this. They don't tell us much about all those 40 years for either one of them. But when his son, Zechariah, took over up in Israel after Jeroboam II died, he only rules for 6 months. They didn't like him. And so they decided that they were going to get rid of him. And so there's a guy named Shallum who kills him. He only reigns for 1 month. Remember, Jehu had been told we're going to reign for 5 generations. So now we're beyond the second big dynasty, the Omri dynasty, a big one, the Jehu dynasty, a big one. And now these last guys, most of them, I think Menahem might be the only one who dies a natural death. Maybe Hoshea does, but that's in prison. So Shallum reigns 1 month, and then Menahem takes over. Menahem says, I am going to make peace with those around me. I'm not going to try and fight them. I'm going to make peace. So he collects money from 60,000 of his citizens, if the number is correct, and they're paying tribute money every year to somebody else not to beat them up. So hush money, as it were, whatever you want to say. So he goes against the city, even killing pregnant women and the babies. If you kill the babies, you've kept that people from having an army for the next generation.
Dynasty, yeah.
And so that's the wicked thing about that. Finally, we get an Assyrian king, Tiglath-Pileser III. And now the Assyrians are coming back again. And the drumbeat is going to roll, and everybody else is going to fall because of them. And so he's paying the tribute money. Then, so Menahem is not liked because he's not giving the money away from the temple, but he's taking the money from everybody else. So they didn't like that. So when his son, Pekahiah, takes over, he rules for 2 years, and then Pekah, the general, says, out with him. Sorry for doing this quickly, but it's just the way it is. And so then Pekah ben Remaliah, we're going to see him a lot when we get to the book of Isaiah next fall. He's going to be a major player. He and 50 Gileadites, there's always 50. I don't know why, there's always 50 outrunners, every single one of them, they get their group of 50. But then Tiglath-Pileser starts coming in. He's 745 to 727. One of them who really starts the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and where they really are going to just go and attack everybody. At this point, already in 732, they're trading people in various lands. I've talked to you about that exile where you simply divide everybody up so they can't join in a rebellion one against another. And so in 732 already, Damascus gets burned down by Tiglath-Pileser, and the northern kingdom is attacked, and Pekah is killed, and Hoshea, the last king, is put in as what they call a puppet king. You will do what I tell you to do, and that goes on for 10 years until he thinks he can get away with revolting. Down in Judah, we have a different king who is, the co-regent Jotham that I've talked about, and he builds something about the upper gate in the house of the Lord. Nobody's quite sure what that means. And then Rezin of Syria and Pekah of the northern kingdom are going to say, would you come and join with us in fighting against the Assyrians? So Tiglath-Pileser was winning, but they didn't like that too much. I'm almost to the end of what we're going to do here now. Ahaz, the son of Jotham, takes over. He rules from when he's 20 till he's 36. We're going to see him in a major way in the book of Isaiah next fall. Finally now, with about the time of Tiglath-Pileser, maybe just 10 years before it, we're now getting into the time of the writing prophets. Amos is 760, then Hosea, Micah, and Isaiah, and probably we're going to do Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah, and get a little bit toward the end of Judah's time. That'll be our next fall. We're going to do 6 weeks just on Isaiah. Okay, at least that's the plan. And that's not nearly enough time, but at least it's a little bit. And I'm going to work through every line of Isaiah 12 with you, I know that. And most of the other prophets as well. So we'll get a chance to look at that. And then Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Joel, and Jonah will be in the spring next year. Okay, so it'll be the prophetic, the writing prophets. But anyway, we're going to see these guys named some more, so we'll do some review on that. But anyway, this is when the Assyrians take over. The king in Jerusalem now, instead of Jotham, is now Ahaz. And he actually looks at a plan for an altar up in the north in Syria, and he builds one like that in the temple. They didn't have to. They didn't have to, but he's trying to just butter up the king and say, I'm going to do everything I can for you. And so finally we get to the last king of the north, and that's where we end for today in 2 Kings. Hoshea ben Elah, there are a couple Elahs we've seen earlier, he rules for 9 years. After Tiglath-Pileser died, Shalmaneser V takes over. And he's going to rule 727 to 722. And he's going to try to enforce them paying tribute, because Hoshea tried to ally himself with Egypt and said, hey, get me out of paying tribute to the Assyrians. So Samaria is taken after 3 years. Hoshea probably didn't last that whole time. And then Samaria is destroyed, and most of the rest of the people are taken into captivity. But we've got to look at this at the end. Here's the big summary. Here's, in essence, where 2 Kings probably ended, until the people came south, and they said, these people in the south are doing the same thing they did in the north. The people worshiped other gods. They walked in foreign customs. They did secret things. They built high places. They built pillars. They built sacred poles. Their offerings were made on high places. They provoked the Lord. They served idols. They refused warnings from the prophets. They despised the statutes. They were stubborn. They became false. They rejected the commandments. They made cast images of 2 calves. They made a sacred pole. They worshiped the host of heaven. They worshiped Baal. They passed their sons and daughters through the fire. They used divination, augury, sold themselves to do evil, and the Lord drove them out. So Judah alone was left, and then Judah does the same thing. And the people followed the sins of Jeroboam ben Nebat, so the Lord removed them as the prophets had said. And they bring people from other nations in to the north, and at first there are some lions coming in who are eating the people up. And they're saying, well, that's because you're bringing in other worship practices. Yahweh doesn't like that. The lions, remember, we've seen the lions a couple of times. And then finally, the Assyrian king brings some of the priests from the north back, and they teach the laws of God in the land, even though the nations are still doing their idolatry there. And so it says that Israel forgot, which is the key word all the way through Deuteronomy. 2 Kings 17, if you want to know the short version of what sin is in the Old Testament, I don't think there's anything not there. Thank you all very much,
Thank you.
And-
on such a high note.